Joshua's actually the one that was able to help them cross over in, occupy, and settle into the promised land.
Right.
And so I think we've got to embrace the principle of continuity.
Right.
Where the Apostle Paul kind of talks about it in the book of 1 Corinthians, where there's this interesting dispute that breaks out in the church about who was the one that baptized them or led them to Christ. And some were like, man, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Jesus. And he kind of shuts the whole thing down.
He's like, nah.
And he uses this amazing agrarian example. He says, one plants,
and
another waters, but God gives the increase.
Welcome back to another Vision Lab on the Weekend Exhale with BOL. Have you been enjoying these series so far? Have you been enjoying POV and the playbook and several of the other programs that we have? My personal favorite is What Just Happened, because we talk about all the things that are in the news, trending topics, and we talk about them from a perspective of the believer. But here in the Vision Lab, we make no apologies about speaking to our entrepreneurs, our leaders, ministry leaders, and directors as well, those in the C-suite, those who want to take their vision from concept to reality. And I'm excited to have with me my brother from another mother, my co-host.
Hey, we in the house.
That's right. That's
Friday
right.
night, man.
Pastor W. Snell. Yeah, yes, Friday night, man.
Yeah, it's time to wind down,
exhale.
And do something with the leaders in our church and within the body.
Absolutely. One of the things that is super critical as we look at this concept of the Vision Lab is, you know, what are some of those things that help us to bring those visions, that thing that God has placed heavy on your heart, from concept to reality. Now, I want to say something right here. This is a shameless plug.
Okay.
Man, if you missed Vision and Dreamers Conference 2024, you missed something big.
You did. It was an epic experience.
I mean, that's the only word.
There's just something about when you have people that are full of vision,
right,
and they're praying in the same direction, believing in the same direction, being equipped, the stories, like the energy, the fellowship.
Absolutely.
I mean, I won't even lie. I mean, you hear people talking about how my cup overflowed. That was kind of one of those weekends. It's still full.
It's still full. And many of you are joining us because you came to Vision and Dreamers, and that was actually the Friday night that Vision Lab played, and so several of you told me I'm going to be following along. So if you're one of those people that
testify in the chat,
come on, testify. Let us know in the chat that you were with us that weekend, man. I tell you, that message from Devon Franklin to close out the weekend.
Yeah,
absolutely powerful.
But even as we open, Dr. Russell shared the message.
This is true.
To my dangerous success.
Wow.
And how there are these things that can still go well,
right?
But it's not necessarily proof of divine.
There it is.
Confirmation. Of kind of how we're moving.
And
then Devon Franklin, closed us out on Sunday. The trainings, the conversations. It was really rich.
The breakouts, the plenaries, the panel discussions, the Vision Awardee, and some of her story. It was absolutely amazing. And one of the things we want to share, the reason why I bring this up right here, is that this Vision Lab is a space where we can continue making those similar deposits. That same audience that was with us for Vision and Dreamers Conference, this is your space. And we want to let you know that we got something coming up for you next year in 2025. So make sure you stay tuned so you can get more information around that.
Stay tuned. You do not want to miss.
You do not want to miss it. And space will be limited. So you want to make sure you get registered and get your seat spoken for. But today we want to dive into the topic of leadership development. And then developing leaders.
Right.
Leadership development on the one side, of course, is where you as the leader are fine-tuning your own skill sets. You are looking in the mirror and saying, probably need to tighten that up a little bit.
Sure.
And what is that mirror that you're using as a litmus test to be able to say, here are some of the areas where I may be weak.
Yeah.
Some of them you can sharpen, others you need to staff for.
Sure.
But then on the flip side, how do you then develop your team? How do you call from them the leadership qualities and aspects that you see in them? We want to hold space for that conversation today as we dive in. Doc, talk to us about what leadership development means for you.
So if I could give maybe just kind of a biblical basis of it. So there's a story in the book of Exodus where the children of Israel are newly removed from the land of Egypt.
Yeah.
And so Moses kind of has this construct where he is sitting down there are millions of people. And every time there's a dispute,
millions.
A conflict, a challenge, a concern, they're making appointments with Moses from sun up to sundown.
Mercy.
And Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, was just like, yo, dude, what are you doing?
This is not it.
Like, this is not sustainable. He was
work.
like, you'll wear yourself out
and
you'll wear out the people. Like, this is not a model that is something that's going to be fruitful going forward.
Right.
And he was just like, yo, you need to establish men or elders in that particular cultural context. You know, some to be over 50, hundreds, you know what I'm saying, larger groups. And he was just like, you know, you deal with those major matters, but bring those minor concerns, you know, to these group of individuals that are designed, you know what I'm saying, to kind of help filter through certain things. So I think essentially when we talk about leadership development, it's kind of the recognition, number one, that I am finite. I cannot do it all.
That's it.
You cannot be all things to all people.
That's so good.
But also it's the recognition that providentially, God has kind of put people in your sphere that are actually designed and ordained by God to help, you know, facilitate that vision.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So that, you know, those things where you have limitations, they're able to continue to carry it on. And one of the things that happened, and especially when we talk about it in the spiritual context, is, man, you know, basically Moses kind of they had this spiritual ceremony where the spirit that was in Moses was imparted to them. So they operated with the same wisdom, anointing, spiritual strength that Moses operated with. And so I think essentially in my context, it is kind of moving in such a way that the anointing that is present in me, I transfer it to those who are kind of working with me.
Right.
So they move with as much power, anointing, spiritual wisdom as I do.
Wow. This is so good because it really touches on both sides, right? He, as the leader, recognizing this is a developmental step for him to delegate and allow them space to make those decisions, but then also for those who he is delegating to be called up, as they say, right? Bring them off of the bench and get them into the game.
And this step, though, that Moses took, I think one of the keys, I don't know if people realize it, one of the things that Moses is commended about is actually his meekness. And you cannot have a large ego and make this particular move or pivot that we're referencing. Because ego says, I've got to do it all. Ego says, I've got to be credited for all the positive results.
That's good.
And so some of us will take on more responsibility than we actually have capacity for, just so that we can be credited with the positive result whenever it comes. But the problem is that when you operate in that kind of leadership vacuum, that positive result almost never comes. Or you're so worn out by the time it comes that you have nothing to give after that moment.
You know, one of the things I love about this particular story is the third piece, which is Moses' ability to listen to Jethro. This is a father-in-law.
That can be kind of
that can be interesting, but also, I mean, has Jethro ever sat in Moses' position before? Why would he listen to what Moses, I mean, what Jethro has to say? You haven't walked this walk. You don't know what I'm going through. But he found wisdom in what he was sharing. And I love that, there's a whole confirmation piece that happens as this spirit that was imparted to Moses is then imparted to these leaders that he is calling up. And I think that is absolutely amazing. And again, one of those things we want to ensure that as leaders, we do not miss the opportunity. I love this concept when you create an atmosphere as a leader where everyone at the table is it feels willing, feels able to share from the perspective of what I have to contribute will be received. And when you're able to do that, when you're able to have that kind of experience, you are also able to gain more wisdom because you never can tell where that next great idea is going to come from.
And I think one of the things that really should help us understand this principle is, again, going back to the recognition of our own finiteness.
Right.
One of my favorite authors, Ellen White, makes a statement that when God gives a man a work, he or she takes it as far as they can go. And when they can go no further, God then confers that responsibility upon someone else. And so Moses essentially kind of models that so that, he has Aaron that's kind of there. Over time, he develops kind of a Joshua and a Caleb. And, and true to form, Moses reaches a point where his patience, he just can't take it anymore. He's supposed to be speaking to rocks and he's striking them. And God says, okay, this is as far as you can take it. But it's amazing because essentially Joshua steps in and because he had the spirit that was in Moses and he had been able to be mentored and poured into by Moses.
This is so good.
Moses, Joshua was actually the one that was able to help them cross over in, occupy, and settle into the promised land. And so I think we've got to embrace the principle of continuity, where the Apostle Paul kind of talks about it in the book of 1 Corinthians, where there's this interesting dispute that breaks out in the church about who was the one that baptized them or led them to Christ. And some were like, man, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Jesus. And he kind of shuts the whole thing down.
He's like, nah.
And he uses this amazing agrarian example. He says, one plants, another waters, but God gives the increase.
So good.
And he says, like, man, he who plants and he who waters are nothing, but it's God that gives the increase. And so he's essentially saying, all right, somebody comes along at a point and they plant. Somebody else waters in your spiritual journey. But at the end of the day, it's all God.
Mercy.
And so at the end of the day, we have to remember that the vision is not the intellectual property of the one who's carrying the vision. No, at one point, you just going to plant. Someone else is going to water. But God is going to give it the increase.
It's like a relay race. You
it's
hand that baton off, and somebody else takes it the next leg, and then they hand it off, and somebody takes it. That's so good.
And it's not just it didn't just operate in a spiritual entity like the church. It's there was somebody that was a planter in the history of McDonald's.
This is true.
Somebody else watered, you know what I'm saying, in the history of McDonald's. And there was somebody else that's reaping a certain harvest because of what those who went before them did. Same thing whether it's Nike or Coca-Cola or whatever it is.
Go down the line,
very few people were there at the beginning and at the present, because at the end of the day, all of us are going to kind of fade off to the side, whether it's a Steve Jobs and Apple is still moving
still
forward.
Rolling, right. And I love this for the nonprofit that's out there, for the entrepreneur. Either you're solo, you have a small team, for the business owner, for the service provider. Maybe you've created a gadget or a widget or something, and that's what you're putting out there and you're selling. Maybe you are in a ministry context, right? You could be leading a particular ministry. One of the things that we can learn from Moses, one of the things we can learn from some of the principles that have been shared in the Bible is that we need to be building our team, number one, but number two, we need to be looking internally to see where are those blind spots, where are those areas of growth. I love the concept or the phrase that you either fine tune your weaknesses or you staff for them. And I love that idea of, to be clear, sometimes to be able to bring something to reality, you may not possess all of the skill sets, but you have been given this large, high-level vision. And so sometimes it's an issue of, let me go and figure out some of the things that I can do. But then other times it's a matter of getting somebody to realize that vision with you and bringing them alongside and empowering them to carry that portion of the responsibility. That's part of the leader's journey. That's part of the visionary's journey as well. As you've been given this dream and this vision to steward, how will you steward it well? And one of the ways that you do that is ensure that you're building the team, that you're growing the team, but that you're calling leadership out of those who are in your team as well.
But let me get you to define that term, blind spot.
Blind spot.
You mentioned it, but we want to make sure everybody gets it.
Absolutely. And so blind spots, sometimes you don't recognize where your weaknesses are. Okay. One of the things a good friend of mine said, you should seek to earn a PhD in you. And that thing hit hard when he said it. You know, do you really know yourself? Now, I'm going to give some practical examples from my own life. I suffer from OCD. So I need things just so. And one of the things I realized is that checklists really work for me. So if I put it on the checklist, I've got to get it done because that's something that I've recognized about me. But checklists don't necessarily work in every aspect of my leadership journey. There are sometimes that things are abstract. You have to be able to roll with the punches. You're not going to be able to have a plan. And having people around me who can help to, as they say, you know, make sure that those rough edges are rounded off, that helps me to see those blind spots very clearly and recognize these are areas not necessarily that I'm going to grow past, because I'll be honest, I'm 40-something years old now. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to whittle that thing down, but I have people in my sphere and in my space that can help to round out some of those things. As a leader, taking thoughtful time to recognize those things about yourself, they're not necessarily weaknesses, they're blind spots. They're things that they're just part of who you are. It's your nature. Some people refill by having a lot of people around them. Other people refill by being completely in solitude. You just need to know which one you are so that you can be refilled. It isn't wrong or right. It's a matter of knowing yourself and bringing that full self to your leadership journey.
Wow, y'all, this is some good stuff. Practical tips to help us walk out our visions. Be sure to join Pastor Snell and I on Second Fridays for POV, where we'll be discussing all the hot topics in relationships, marriage, and dating. Exhale with BOL is every Friday night, so lock it in your calendar. Now let's get back to Vision Lab.
Yeah, but I do want to just say, you know, as we evaluate ourselves, there is a biblical principle at work. So that even when you look at the idea of spiritual gifts or gifts assigned to us by God, one of the things, you know, Paul talks about is how, you know, some were given the gift to teach, some admonish, encourage, administration, healings. And one of the things that becomes clear is that God never gave any person all of the gifts. So that in that context, what he's saying is that we were actually built for collaboration. We were actually built for community and teamwork. He did not make any individual completely self-sufficient where he would be able to operate outside of, you know, community in order to maximize his or her complete potential. So that even if you look at the apostles, we tend to kind of focus on the 12, but there were other apostles. All right, so that core group, a number of them did a lot of healing, but not all apostles did healings. Like, you know, Peter, Paul seemed to preach, but say somebody like Matthias, I don't think we've ever heard anything that he said. All right, but I think maybe he had the gift of helps. All right, so I think that we have to kind of recognize that fundamentally, you know, I don't have all of the gifts. And so I'm going to have to be able to recognize my need to be assigned with those who complement my gifts and help build up my weaknesses or my deficits.
That's so good. And one of the things that we can be tempted to do in the leader's journey is to call one gift better than another. To pit them against one another. But the truth of the matter is, you know, the knuckle isn't going to say to the knee, hey, I'm doing better than you. It's all a part of the body, and you need every aspect in order to move forward and to be successful. So there's some other components of the visionary and the leader's journey that is, you know, evident in this story as well when we look at the different gifts that are bestowed upon people. But then how do you identify those? Do you have a critical eye towards how your team is operating, how your unit is functioning? And then can you begin to really discern and decipher, okay, this team member is at this level and is doing this kind of work, and maybe this team member kind of pulls some others together, so there's some leadership qualities there. But recognizing those pieces in your team because we've been gifted differently, can really help you, especially when there's a crisis, when you need to move faster, you know which ones to put in what place so that you can move and get things done.
Yeah. So, I think that, there are certain mistakes I think that we make in identifying and trying to nurture other leaders. So especially in identifying leaders, one of the things that you can't do is you can't identify a leader based upon externals. So what we tend to do sometimes is we tend to focus more on container than actually content.
Mercy.
Some of us, we develop a leadership type. Maybe it's just based upon what we've seen or what we're used to or what's a part of our history. But sometimes leaders come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes the leader is not always the most vocal one. Sometimes it's not always the loudest one. It's not always the most charismatic person. Sometimes you may have this very charismatic person, but they have the focus or the attention span of a gnat. So one of the things that you got to really avoid doing is kind of really just looking at externals and really kind of look at content, because one of the things that God said to even Samuel. Remember when Samuel went to Jesse's house?
That's correct.
To really evaluate, which one was going to be the king of Israel, the next king. He looked at Jesse's oldest son.
He's like,
man,
for
he's
sure.
tall. I mean, he stands, tall. He's got the stature like what Saul does.
was, yeah.
And Jesse's like, you know what?
Boom.
That's him.
The one.
And God is like, nope, that's not the one. Bring it up. Nope, that's not the one. Nope, that's not the one. And what God is beginning to is making clear. It's just like, yo, dude, I don't see the way man sees.
Mercy.
Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks upon the heart. And so I do think that there is a certain discernment that is necessary so that you don't begin to kind of lean into this prototype, so that, all right, the person that wears a suit and tie, or the person that's always the first in the building, or the person that has the loudest voice, or the person that maybe that's maybe the most degreed. That might not necessarily be the one. Because leaders come in all shapes and sizes.
And there's so much there to really sink your teeth into. What is that criteria that you're using to determine? And are you limited in the fact that you have only seen certain types of leadership? And so when you listen to that and you hear that content versus container, there is a calling for a leader to really get to know the team.
Got to know the team.
Get to know them, not just in the work context, not just in the context of getting things done, but outside of that, knowing their families, knowing their idiosyncrasies, their quibbles and their quirks, the fact that they, unfortunately like the Lakers. You got to know these things, because it really does help to build a little bit of camaraderie and teamwork in a family environment, but also it really helps you to understand how they tick. And that gives you that insight and perspective that we're talking about.
And I think a lot of times just being observant can really help.
Oh yeah.
So that there are times where there may be this really gifted, maybe degreed, charismatic person that kind of meets the profile.
Right.
But when they talk, everybody else kind of rolling their eyes.
You
can tell people are not following them. They're tolerating them.
That's good.
And there may be somebody else that's maybe a little more quiet, a little bit more demure. Maybe they're not as demonstrative, but when they do speak, everybody listens.
That's good.
There is a command. They operate with a competence and maybe not as much charisma. And so I just want to just really encourage us to kind of make sure that we just are not looking at this profile. And a lot of times that profile that we get is from the world, and it's not really based upon discernment or character.
That's so good. One of, as you say that, it calls back to the concept of development, because observation is not just good for the leader to be able to place, heavier responsibilities or to call people out. Observation is also good for you to be able to pull aside someone and say, man, I kind of noticed this. Have you noticed that?
Sure.
I mean, maybe this is you're on firing on all these cylinders here, but I think in these areas, if you kind of tighten up, you can really kind of bring a little bit more in terms of a fuller package to the table. And this is that development piece.
And one of the things I wanted to just add, because when you talk about that development piece, when you talk about developing leaders, you develop them through sharing principles, not just practices. So what happens is when we just give them practices, what we're trying to do in some ways is make a carbon copy of ourselves.
Good.
That says, all right, because I do it this
way.
exact way, you've got to do it that same exact way. That's actually not necessarily developing a leader. It's just replicating a modality or an approach to doing things. But when you talk about developing leaders, what you're doing is sharing principles.
Yeah.
So that one of the things I have to do, especially when I was teaching here at Oakwood, is I would teach preaching to the young pastors. All right, so I wouldn't say to them, all right, because there are certain things I do, right? I clap when I get animated. I tend to elevate when I get excited. I walk around and I move around. But that's not what I taught them. I didn't say, all right, clap to make the point. I'm not even trying to do that. That's not a strategy.
It just comes out.
It's what comes out. I didn't say sweat when you preach. That's kind of unique to me. I didn't say you got to preach a certain hour. But the principles are how to mine the truth out of a text. How to communicate with simplicity and clarity. How to correctly process truth in a way that is going to be palatable for the masses. So what I'm doing is I'm communicating principles. Not necessarily practices or idiosyncrasies. Because we don't need another Debly Air Snell. Like there's because what we used to do as young pastors is like, all right, dog it, let me try to say it like he would say it, or do it like Cleveland would do it. But at the end of the day, that's not really what makes impact. Though there are principles that they gave us that are lived out, and those principles become timeless with any generation.
So good. And what you are and who you are and what you bring to the table is needed. And because God is so phenomenal and because he is so great, he has poured within each one of us something specific and unique that we alone can bring to the world. And so when we dumb that down, when we seek to mimic, we are actually indicting God for putting in us something specific and unique. And so, the old adage says, be you because everyone else is taken.
Everybody else is taken. I like that.
I like that.
Well, I just think you see a certain individualism in the sense of you have DNA. Fingerprints. I mean, it's stunning to me, Kurt. That in, I guess, 6,000 years of human recorded history, that God has never reused a single set of fingerprints.
This is
He's
amazing.
Never reused. Like you could think, okay, man, let me at least reach back to Noah's time. And I can, nobody will know, but no, we're that carefully crafted. We are custom beings, not designed to be replicas or copies. And that's why even Ella White says, we're not to be reflectors of other men's thoughts. We're supposed to seek God to get, personal clarity and direction and vision from the maker for ourselves.
And this is also coming back to the leader as well, recognizing that how you are leading and shepherding one member of your team may not necessarily work for others because they're all unique and special. There may be something that you need to be doing for this worker, for this team member that this other one doesn't need. They don't need to be engaged like that. We see this in the parenting realm as well. You can't parent all of your kids. You cannot. So,
but there's a kind of a well, it's not so contemporary, but I don't know if you guys remember the NBA dynasty, the Chicago Bulls.
This is true.
In their last 3 title runs, they had a player called Dennis Rodman, and the coach, Phil Jackson. You had Michael Jordan, Scotty. They moved a certain way. Dennis Rodman, he was an outlier. Just a different personality, but he would give him freedoms, liberties. He would relate and coach him differently than everyone else. And I think that we think principle is coaching or treating everybody equally. Well, no. Let me just say this. You treat everyone equally, but you don't treat everyone the same. You give everybody an equal amount of dignity, equity, integrity, compassion. But you kind of approach each team member differently
because they have different things. Family, this has been rich. Of course, we want to make sure that we engage in the conversation. One of the things that I feel like we're kind of landing on here is that whole playbook concept. So
it always comes back to the
playbook. We want to make sure that you guys get a chance to check out some of the other content and shows that we have here at the Weekend Exhale with BOL. But Doc, as we get ready to land, a final parting message to that leader that is on both journeys right now. They are developing themselves, but they're also developing a team. What is a critical truth that you want to leave them with as we close out today's episode?
So I would just say, to a leader there, I think there's a critical principle that I think overlaps everything that we've talked about today. At the end of the day, if you're going to be a great leader, you cannot be threatened by other gifted, talented people that God has placed
So good.
and assigned to your ecosystem.
So good.
I think at the end of the day, John Maxwell, he talks about how all of us have a leadership lid. And so one of the things that he said is that if your lid is at a level 4, you'll never be able to lead somebody whose lid is at a level 6 or 7.
Mercy.
So I think that's really an important call
Yeah.
to personal leadership development.
Yes.
Because I've got to always be raising that lid
Lid.
spiritually, professionally,
Yeah.
in my competence, in the way I handle stress or manage difficulties. Because at the end of the day, if I'm always stuck at a 5, I'll only be able to lead people that are on a level 4, 3, 2, or 1.
Yeah.
So you got to always be constantly raising that lid. And then at the end of the day, you got to operate with a certain amount of security. You got to realize that God has created you a certain way. He's given you the gifts that you have on purpose, the way you process information, the way you kind of consume data, the way you engage with people. There's nothing wrong with it. And you got to be secure in the giftings that God has assigned to you. And if God raises up people that maybe have a strength in a particular area, or maybe you see people gravitating toward them in another area, you cannot begin to kind of create an assault on those people. You cannot live in a world of comparisons. You can't withdraw or isolate yourself from certain individuals. No, at the end of the day, you've got to be willing to kind of utilize those gifts, leverage those talents for the glory of God, however it is that God has assigned you to lead. I need you to know only small leaders are willing to operate in a space where they lead small team members.
Mercy.
Big leaders are willing to embrace big talents, big gifts, big forms of charisma, because at the end of the day, if the team thrives because of, the tremendous gifts, at the end of the day, it's going to make the leader look good.
Amen, amen. Well, family, we want to say a word of thanks to all of you for hanging out with us. This has been rich.
Oh, yes,
this has
good
been
time.
rich.
Good time.
And we know we're coming to the close of this particular season.
Yeah, I know, right? Wow.
First season of Exhale.
It's come and gone. Really
I
quickly.
mean, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just been amazing. But we want you to lock in with us. There's so much other content that you can check out, both from the Weekend Exhale with BOL, but also the previous series, which was Fresh Start Sunday.
That's right.
And those are still available for you on the Breath of Life YouTube page and in the app. And we want to encourage you guys to check those out. We always ask you to do a couple of things for us as we close, and one of those is to share. If there's something that was shared here today, a principle or practice that definitely spoke to your mind, heart, soul, and something that you definitely think you want to share with somebody else, write that one point down, share it with somebody else, and if they ask you, where did you get that from, send them on back over to us here at the Weekend Exhale with BOL. The second thing we ask that you do is that you would pray, that your prayers is literally the fuel for the engine called Breath of Life, and we can only move as far as your prayers will take us. And then the third thing we ask that you do is to give. Some of you have given sacrificially, systematically, consistently, and we thank you, because those gifts are why there are more shows on the platform. But there are some ways that you can give that will be coming up on the screen right now, and they are also in the description. Whether you want to do by mail, by phone, if you want to give by text, if you want to give by Cash App, in whatever way and whatever amount God is impressing on you to pour into this ministry, we want to give you that opportunity right now. We want to say a word of thanks yet again for your time and attention, for coming here. Again, Vision Lab is a space that has been created with those CEOs, those entrepreneurs, those business owners, those that God has placed a vision in their minds and hearts, and you want to bring that vision to reality. And we pray that this conversation today was able to bless you, was able to bring you into that space just a little bit closer, where you can glean some practices and principles that will help you on your journey. Doc,
all right.
Any final words for the people as we close it out today?
Listen, I'm just praying that you have a blessed and safe and excuseless summer.
That's it.
And we look forward to seeing you in the fall. We'll be coming back with more great Friday night content as we continue the Weekend Exhale with BOL. It's graduation season, and I want to say congrats to all of our recent graduates. And though we're thankful for how God is blessing you, the only problem is that we ask 18 or 19-year-olds to make decisions that affect the rest of their lives. That's why I'm inviting you to join me for our first ever Breath of Life Decision Day. It's a one-day online conference on July the 7th. I'm going to be joined by a number of individuals that are going to help our young people make decisions about their future. We're going to be discussing things like how to discover your calling. Does an HBCU put me at a disadvantage? When do I need to pivot, changing schools or majors, or how to dream big? It's going to be held on July the 7th from 10 a.m. to 2 o'clock p.m. It's a free conference, but we don't just want the kids to come. We want the parents to come so that we can make these decisions with God's tutelage as a village. So again, that's going to be July the 7th from 10 a.m. to 2 o'clock p.m. I need you to know it's going to be a great time of learning. You're going to be equipped. You're going to be given some tools to make sure that you land at the right place and that you make the right choice. I look forward to seeing you soon on Decision Day. What's good, family? Breath of Life is going to be coming to the West Coast. We're excited that from July the 14th to July the 27th, we're going to be hosting our third annual Hope Rally under the theme Almost Home. We're going to be meeting for those 2 weeks in Long Beach, California. We're going to be meeting each night except for Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 o'clock p.m. It's an in-person meeting only, so you can't catch it online. You've got to be in the house. We're going to be joined in musical partnership by gospel recording artists Smokey Norfolk, Jonathan Nelson, and Donnie McClurkin. Each night, dinner is going to be served, and there's going to be special programming for your youth and for your little ones. It's going to be a high time in Zion, where we're going to be preaching the good news of Jesus Christ. And we're going to be reminded that this world is not our home. Again, I look forward to seeing you in Long Beach, California from July the 14th to the 27th. Make sure that you're planning to be there and you bring somebody with you. If you want more information, go to our website at www.breathoflife.tv. God bless. I'll be seeing you this summer.
Thank you for watching Vision Lab. The Weekend Exhale with BOL is every Friday night at 8 p.m. Central Time. Join us for honest discussion, relevant topics, and practical advice. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single episode. Your support keeps the mission of Breath of Life moving forward. There are ways to give both on screen and in the description. Catch up on the episodes you may have missed by clicking on one of the playlists right here. Some good content, y'all, packed with information that you want to hear. Go! We'll see you over there.